cheer. To climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us their freedom and fame. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our purses are ready, steady, friends, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men, our money will give.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Doug Ulwick. I'm the president of the Historical Society of Old Abington. And welcome to the folks on cable who are seeing this. It's broadcast on local cable, and it's also on YouTube. So if you want to share it with all your friends, it shouldn't be that hard to do. And this is a wonderful turnout. I thank you all for being here. And let's start this meeting the way we start all of our meetings, with a salute to the flag. If you're capable of standing, please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. So the Historical Society of Old Abington has six, usually, not this year, but six conversations. They used to be programs, and now conversations per year, 3 in the fall, 3 in the spring. And we used to, once upon a time, have people come in and speak to us for 40 minutes about something. And we found that that was very limiting as to who was available, who could do it, and the subjects that could be explored. So we changed the format up to make it a conversation, where we could have someone come in and talk about what they knew, what they did, and share that with the audience. And also the audience has a chance to participate as well. So we like to think that makes it more interesting too. So don't be terribly shy if you have something that comes up during the course of the conversation you want to ask about. We'll see if we can accommodate. So that's kind of a cool thing. We will be meeting somewhat on a lesser basis over the summer to plan next year's conversations. And we're going to be looking to form a committee to do that and to do refreshments and whatever. Just one quick little bit of business. How many members do we have here? Show of hands. Okay, that's a pretty good turnout. I just want a vote on a couple of small items. We're talking about making some changes. We already changed the meeting time till 2 o'clock. No one seems to object to that. It used to be 2:30. I suspect that was because people, I love this, used to go to church in the morning and come home and have a family dinner and have it cleaned up by 2 and get here by 2:30. Okay, who does that anymore? I'm not, I see 1, I see 2, okay. It's not happening that much anymore. So 2 o'clock seems to be better, and people get out earlier and can go watch a football game or a basketball game or whatever. So we've changed that, without a vote, by the way. But no, the things that I want an opinion on, a vote yay or nay, is we're talking about changing the annual membership fee from $12 to a $20 suggested donation, and changing the lifetime membership fee from $75 to $100. We've talked about it a little bit in the past couple of meetings. So all in support of that? Raise hands. Thank you. Any opposed? The ayes carry it. Unanimous. Thank you all very much.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it 100 per person or 100 couple?
We've always done it per person, but if it's a financial hardship, we'll probably do it as couple. Okay. Just hit us up. Okay. We're very flexible. We don't want anything that will keep people away. So anything that works, we're open to it. We just need guidelines. Yes?
Non-member question.
Go for it.
When does your year begin?
Good question. We're beginning it in September. We're beginning to send out membership information over the course of the summer. And pretty much everything begins anew in September, October.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's see. Also, we're going to be working on some features for members, a private HSOA Facebook page, and we'll see about a monthly newsletter even. And as I said, we're talking about reestablishing standing committees for refreshments programs. We also have a writing award we haven't awarded for a while, which I think we should publicize and begin to reactivate that. So more food for thought moving forward. Today's presentation, and we do have a guest speaker coming in who's here actually already to talk with us about aspects of this topic. But that old town religion, based upon, of course, that song, that old time religion. And this was inspired because late last year we were aware that the Rockland Congregational Church, UCC, was closing its doors and going to make changes that would pass on the ownership of the building to another congregation. That was pretty shocking. It was a little painful for everyone involved, but it got me thinking, well, this is nothing new. A couple years ago, we had done a program on the closing of what I will always call St. Mark's Lutheran Church, but later Joy in Christ Lutheran Church. It was during COVID, and we had Jeff Stone, who was handling the closing of the church, come in and chat with us, and all of their records ended up here, and a little preview. Most of the congregational Rockland records are ending up here, which is correct. It's the way it should be. But I thought it appropriate to address the bigger topic about the different religions in town, when they got here, how they got here, and what happened to them. What's still open, what's closed, and the different factors. So that part one is going to be kind of historic background, and part two is going to be a discussion about the things that influence a church staying open, closing, growing, not growing, merging, whatever. And for that, we have the Reverend Dr. Christy Coburn to help us talk through that part of the program. But let's start with some basic history. And one of the source books that we used, actually, could we have the lights on, Michelle? Thank you. One of the source books that was easy to put our hands on to use was the 1912 bicentennial book of the Old Town of Abington. There was a page in there for each town that featured its current churches. So I'm seeing right here, this is the Abington page. In the upper left, we're seeing the First Congregational Church. Upper right, North Abington Baptist. Middle left is the Fourth, later North Congregational Church. And the middle, smack dab in the middle, is, I think a lot of you knew it as Glad Tidings Church, but it was actually built as the Church of the New Jerusalem, a Swedenborgian church. It's gone, but it stood right across the street. And then to the middle right was the Unitarian or Universalist. Thank you, I knew Dan would know. Universalist church that stood on the corner of Washington Street and West Chapel Street. Here we see to the bottom left St. Bridget's with its original steeple on it. And the last one here on this page, lower right, is the Methodist Church that was in, okay, hang on, I should know where it was. Yeah, but Thicket. I was trying to say the Thicket, because the Thicket is the part of town it was in. So those are the Abington churches. And here we are looking at the Whitman churches. Upper left, Congregational Church. Upper right, Baptist Church, right downtown, center downtown, it's now apartments. Center left, we're looking at the Episcopal Church. Center right, we're looking at the original Methodist Church. It was torn down, altered, changed. In the middle is the Advent Church, Christian Advent? There was a name for it. Advent Christian Church. Building still exists, different congregation. The lower left is Holy Ghost in its first iteration, and the lower right is the Unitarian Church on South Ave that later became part of a factory building, and it is obviously gone. And then last but not least, the Rockland churches. Upper right is the Congregational Church. They seem to always have that position on the page. And then Hatherley Methodist, upper right. They're labeling the middle one on the left as the Christian Science Church. It was actually built as a Methodist church. It's behind Rockland Credit Union. If you don't know it's there, you don't know it's there. And then the Baptist Church, middle right, and then Holy Family Catholic, and then Channing Unitarian Church. So this is the group of churches we're drawing upon to say, when did they arrive? How did they get here? When did they get here? And what happened to them? There are others that came later that aren't here, and at least two of them we will talk about as well. But I did this exercise to, I think, kind of help us in terms of understanding what came and when. The granddaddy of all, Abington's first congregational church. It arrived in 1711 because you didn't have a town if you didn't have a congregational church. And they held that position as the only church in town until after 1800. So they had like 100 years of being there by themselves, roughly in the geographical center of town. Then the folks in Whitman, who were actually kind of a powerhouse in industry and finance, decided they wanted their own. And there was a bit of a painful breakup, but they established, I think I have the date as 1807, I think, was the second Congregational Church of Abington. This was all still one town. It hadn't broken up yet. And then not long after that, by 1813, the third Congregational Church of Abington was built on what was to become Union Street in Rockland. That was interesting because there wasn't even a street there. They put the church there and the street came in later. And then last but not least, North Abington in 1838 built a congregational church as well. They were little upstarts in terms of the architecture and what they did. And we'll talk more about that. But congregational first. And not shortly after, as I said, there was a good 100 years between them. We got the Baptists in, and they first established in Whitman. There's a bunch of different dates, but I'm going with the one from the book, I think, which was 1832 in Whitman. Smack dab in the center of Whitman. But it wasn't Whitman when it was built. It was still South Abington. The towns hadn't divided yet. The same with the second one of the Old Town, the Baptist Church in Rockland, again, Union Street. That was done in 1886, so we've jumped up. And then they had this was a surprise to me, they had a mission church in North Abington that was formed in 1886, and that's the North Abington Baptist Church. But initially it was an offshoot from the Rockland Church that was built as things stretched out. Important to understand, and we'll talk about it a little more in timeline, that by then, this one town of Abington divided into Abington, Whitman, and Rockland. Well, originally South Abington, but later Whitman and Rockland. A lot of church building happened after the division. There was a certain, I think, sense of pride for each town that they wanted their own. So rather than going out of town to go to church, they built their own churches as they were establishing themselves. Also early on, the Universalist Church in Abington first, we just talked about it. It was on the corner of Washington and West Chapel Street. We have some separate information about that up here. Dan Holland is with us in the audience, and he's a member of the society, and he was a member of the church, and he was there when it was torn down. So that one was first in 1841, and then in pretty close succession, again after the town split, the Whitman Church was built in 1888, and the Rockland Church was built in 1889 is the date we have from the books. And the Whitman Church was built on South Ave, not quite downtown, but not too far removed. And the Rockland Church, Webster Street, where it still stands today next to the post office. I wasn't even going to do a Swedenborg church, but this one kind of comes in with an interesting history to it. Swedenborg religion was at the height of fashion, if we will, at one point, and we became very aware of it in a kind of an interesting way. The first Congregational Church had as their third or fourth pastor Reverend Weeks. And he was discovered to be preaching Swedenborgian religion. And someone came in to a service and said, "Do you know what he's doing? He's actually talking about a different theology." And there were hearings there. It was messy. They kicked him out. They absolutely kicked him out. But he had created enough of a following that eventually the town created a sect of Swedenborgian here in town. Ultimately, by 1856, they built a church across the street, and they were well enough established by then. Dunbar Street gave them the land, they built the building, and we'll talk about what happened after that, but that was the start of Swedenborg. It's almost a blip on the horizon, except it was an offshoot of the Congregational Church with a minister who was a rebel. So, kind of interesting. I don't know any ministers who are rebels, he says with a forked tongue. Roman Catholic, okay, one of the biggest religions in town. It didn't land here until St. Bridget's was built. Dates vary, 1862, 1863. And keep in mind, the Irish potato famine was 1845 to 1849. We had an influx of people who were Catholic, who were Roman Catholic, who had no church to go to. So, and not surprisingly, they built a church smack dab in the middle of town. If you look geographically on that, the towns had split by then, I think. Wait a minute. No, they hadn't. It was just before they split. So it really was center of the old town. And so not surprisingly, after that, when they did split, in pretty quick succession, Whitman was the next one at 1880, and then Rockland in 1882, I have. And then, huge gap later, after World War II, we had a new population moving in Brockton, and they built a church as far west in Abington as you could possibly go, St. Nicholas. And that was built in 1962. The population they were serving, I think, was pretty much the Campanelli developments that were right on that part of the town, just over the line. So that was established in 62. The Methodists first came to town in 1870, and the first one in Rockland, Hatherley Methodist. The next one after Hatherley was Whitman. Whitman was interesting. We've talked about it before. The minister was an architect. I love that. And did some very prominent buildings, but he stayed and created the church. He did fundraising. He designed the building. He oversaw the construction of the building. And something we'll talk about, the Methodist Church did not allow ministers to stay in one place very long. They established themselves in this country as preachers on horseback who would go from town to town and have services in people's homes. So they were only allowed to stay 5 or 6 years in a church, and they were transferred by the Methodist Church saying, no, you're going. They kept him there a little longer because he was building churches and raising money and whatever. But the whole effort was on his behalf. He was known for designing, actually the twin to this church, which this church no longer exists, is in Hull. I don't know how they got the hands on their plans, but it's the same building. I was kind of shocked to learn that, but it was. And then, so we did Rockland, Whitman, and then Randolph Street in Abington, again over there, almost into, I have no idea why it ended up where it ended up. There must have been a population there that wanted it there at the time. And last but not least, in 1892, a second Methodist church was established in Rockland, which became later Christian Science Church. There wasn't enough population to support two, and they were kind of the Johnny-come-lately, so that one didn't survive. And then again, another unusual one, kind of a blip on the radar, but it lasted for a while, and it was in the 1912 book, is the Advent Christian Church at 59 West Street. They were formed in 1893. They didn't finish their sanctuary till I think 1897. They stuck around, actually, for a while. We'll talk about what happened to them, but they were kind of quietly there for quite a while, actually. And then Episcopal came to us late. I have no explanation for why. The church itself was formed in 1789, but Whitman got the first Episcopal church in 1910 at 44 Park Avenue. It's still there, it's still active. And the second one is in Rockland on Goddard Ave. They started out in a fairly modest church hall, and added on a very, very contemporary building to it, which had all the wonderful problems a contemporary building had. The roofs leaked like crazy. And, but it was a beautiful little building, and eventually they voted to put a shell over that modern building and do something much more traditional with a steeple and everything else. I was amazed at the time when they did it, but they're still there, so that was cool. They obviously did something right. And then Lutheran in Abington. Lutheran actually started in Whitman. They were meeting at the GAR Hall across from the park. And so when they got land and actually created their own church, they did it just over the Abington line. So it was really serving as many of those original forming members as it could. So that was the most recent church out of the mainline churches. Obviously didn't appear in the 1912 listing. This is a different graphic which shows when they came to town and when they stopped being what they stopped being, and what happened to them. Takes too much study, but it's just interesting to see the graphics. This double line here is when the towns split, when Rockland and Whitman split off as separate towns, and you can see how much church building happened after that. So a lot of it was tied to civic pride as well as a certain religious revival after the Civil War. I would really attribute it to both factors that brought that about to do that. And I already mentioned like the potato famine bringing in Irish workers to town in the shoe industry, which started here in the 1830s. I think when the railroad came to town, it certainly gave us the shot in the arm it needed. So this is a bit of an analysis of what came about when. But okay, what happened after that? And this is mergers and closures that I've kind of put up here on the map to kind of give a sense of what happened. I mentioned the Rockland Franklin Avenue Methodist Church over here, and they closed their doors by 1904, but they became a Christian Science church, and to the best of my knowledge, they are still functional as that today. Still, yeah, okay. 1941, the Swedenborg Church closed its doors as a Swedenborg church, but that's when it became a Glad Tidings church, and a lot of us knew it as that. And yes, and it stayed until Abington Savings Bank bought it and tore it down in 1998. They did find a new home here in Abington for a while at what is now the Senior Center, but that church building ended. Dan Howland brought some pieces from it here. I got permission from the bank before it was torn down to go in and photograph it and measure it, and I hope someday to preserve it on paper. I think there's enough information that we have to do that, but obviously Abington Savings Bank didn't last either, so we now have a parking lot over there. So much for religion, or commerce over religion.
I voted no on that one.
Thank you. Apparently not enough people joined you. So that one disappeared then. Let's see. And then we actually had a bit of a jump. And in 1967, I think we lost two at that time, both Unitarian churches. Whitman, I believe, was 1967. And I believe the Abington Universalist was also. I don't have it on this chart. I should. The congregations went other places. They just couldn't support the church anymore, is really what it came down to. It was a different population. Neither one of those churches fell victim to the major additions that happened to a lot of churches after World War II, when everyone was expecting a huge influx of people that never materialized. And churches added on and found they didn't need the extra space. That didn't happen with Unitarian, but we still have the one in Rockland. Whitman was incorporated into a factory building, which later became condominiums or apartments, and that still stands as that. They kind of took an effort to preserve kind of a churchy facade on the South Avenue side. That was an intentional design thing they did, which was kind of cool. In 1968 was kind of huge. What happened was the Methodist Church in West Abington, the Fourth North Congregational Church at 33 Randolph Street in North Abington, merged back into the First Congregational Church and formed the United Church of Christ. So that was a big move. It was a tough thing to do. I love the fact that certain traditions carried over and carried through. One of the churches did communion at the altar, the other did communion in the pews, and for the longest time they alternated months as to which way they were doing it. Is that still going on?
Yes, it is.
It's still going on. We preserve those things. The West Abington Methodist Church is still a church, no longer Methodist, obviously. And I had the pleasure of converting the Fourth Congregational Church, North Congregational Church, to 17 apartment units after the town finished using it as a town hall and library. So the building is still very functional, just way far away from its original use. And UCC Abington is still going strong as our oldest church in town with the oldest, pardon me, maybe I should, the longest term congregation. Not fair to call them the oldest congregation, is it? Yes.
My father was involved with that. Technically speaking,
Yes, technically speaking.
they formed the United Church of Christ Abington
Yes.
as a separate church. And then the other three merged into that.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be somebody couldn't say that, well, this church survived, the other two did. So three of them merged into the new United Church of Christ Abington.
So I was politically insensitive by saying they merged first and then decided which building they were going to live in.
Yes.
Okay, okay. No, that's a good point. It really is. Because it's a sensitive thing to do. And you really don't want to tromp on people's feelings and traditions. That's why I love that whole thing about communion. You know, the old things are still respected, no matter what. They carry through the merger. The Advent Church in Whitman was sold in 1980 to the South Shore Pentecostal Church. They're still there. They have 2-hour services, I'm told. Like, okay.
That's short.
Yeah, that's short, Larry. I love it. Thank you. Okay. Good luck to your backs and your bladders. But they have an active congregation. They're still going. Frankly, I didn't know they were there. So, but I got an education from doing this. That's fine. Glad Tidings was 1998 that they sold out to the bank and the building was demolished. 2003 was the next one, St. Nicholas Catholic Church. Catholic Church had a lot of problems with what to do with dwindling populations and how they were going to handle it. They notoriously, in my opinion, handled it badly in Scituate, among other places, but they closed the church and told the congregation, get out of here. And as a result, the congregation kind of had a sit-in in the church that went in for years, a vigil that went in saying, no, this is our church, but we'll talk about this in a bit. No, it wasn't their church. It belonged to the Catholic Church. Now, they kind of wised up. I mean, they still did close St. Nicholas. It's, again, a different type of church now. And that congregation went to, I believe, Edith Stein. They gave them a place to go, but they still closed their church. So that was an interesting episode. It was earlier in the closings. Rockland Hatherley Methodist closed in 2008. We're getting into the 2000s with a lot of church closings. We'll talk about why for that one soon too. 2009, Whitman Baptist closed. It's now apartments. 2020, the Abington St. Mark's, later called Joy in Christ Lutheran Church, closed. And just last year, the Rockland Congregational Church closed. They're in the process of bringing their records here into this building. We actually just received some of them today. So that's kind of an overview. I'm sorry if it was lengthy, but there was a lot to talk about there. So what happened? Why did they close? Why did they merge? Where did the populations go? And to discuss that further, I would like to invite forward Christy Coburn, if you'd join me up front. So there are a bunch of factors here. And the first one I like to address, and we just talked about with the Catholic Church, because they did learn, because when it came time for St. Bridget's and Holy Ghost to look at, okay, where do we go from here with dwindling populations, rather than close either one, they merged them. But it brings the first topic as to who holds the keys, who owns the church. We know in the sense of Catholic churches, they own the church. The Catholic Church owns the church. I think it's the same with Episcopal.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I think it's similar with the Methodists. I read that the churches are held in trust for the Methodist Church. But you had a church that is owned by the congregation.
Yes, our churches are owned by the people of the congregation,
Right.
not by the denomination.
Okay, so you guys get to call the shots.
Yes,
Okay.
we do.
That's important because local control versus some overreaching power who aren't there
Yes.
seems
so-
to affect the community.
Right. In the United Church of Christ, each church is its own individual entity. And we receive support from the denomination. So we get support, encouragement. You know, they're there to help us if we have issues or problems. They're there to educate us on anything we need help with, but they don't own us.
Okay, and pastoral supply, I mean, do they
help
recommend
coordinate
ministers, or do they have to approve ministers, or how does that work?
Yes, they have a list. So for me as a pastor, if I want to take a day off, which, you know, is
Heavens,
right.
you can't do that, not allowed.
Yeah, no. They have a list of pastors who are either retired or working in ministries where they're not occupied on Sunday mornings, people who like to do pulpit supply, and you know they have brief descriptions of what they do, where they've been, and phone numbers so that we can call them and
Cool.
recruit them.
A clearinghouse.
Yes, yeah.
I believe the Baptists are set up the same way, if anyone knows, but I think they are from what I've heard.
Depends.
Depends, okay.
Well, in other words.
Which Baptist?
Which Baptist,
Yeah,
and also which region they're in.
Okay.
And what kind of list
Okay.
they use.
Because I know between the two Baptist churches, between Abington and Rockland, they actually are two different
Denominations, right.
And I
Yeah.
believe Rockland is independent,
Could be, probably.
and Abington is American Baptist.
Correct.
So, okay, so I mean, but this begins to color the picture as to what happens. We've already talked about Catholic churches closing and merging. Who gets to make that call? The Catholic Church does. It's not the locals. So it's a different type of decision. And I think that influences a lot of what we've seen in
Yes.
terms of church closings. That if
Yeah.
you've got a congregation that's here and well established and stubborn, they're going to survive.
Right.
I sadly heard that a church in town, I guess I will be bold and name it, the Baptist church like needs a new roof and needs a sprinkler system change or upgrade or something like that, and they're looking and saying, okay, we have a very small congregation, how are we paying for that? And again, it's them, it's that congregation who has to find a way or not.
Yes.
To do that, and so who knows where that's going to end up. We wish them well, but that's a big stumbling block, and you can see how a church faced with expenses like that could have issues moving forward. And it's always sad when it happens, but it's another factor.
Yes.
Local versus non.
And in regard to First Congregational Church of Rockland, you know, they received guidance from the denomination. We have what we call area ministers. So the area minister came in and advised them on what might be the best path forward. But ultimately, it was in the hands of the people of the church, and they decided to go in a different direction from the advice they were given. So again, churches in our denomination, I know there are others like us, we have the final say.
Okay.
We own the place.
No matter what the advice is. Okay,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
for better or worse.
Okay.
I have a lot of bosses.
A lot of box. Yes, you do. Okay. Here's another one of my favorites, and it's always a sensitive topic. Power of personnel. I'm sorry.
I was just thinking, you know, with not disasters, but with people and they own the church, what about, you know, when we have an individual home, you have insurance on your home.
Mhm.
Do churches have to have insurances?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
we do.
yes.
We do.
$1,000 a year.
All
Right, so this guy's my husband, also the chair of the Board of Trustees, so he knows all about the
I was
insurance.
thinking, with disasters, yes, that's a separate entity unto itself. But then I went, wait a minute, you got something happening
The property owners.
with a roof, you need a roof.
Yeah.
And like you said, all the congregation,
I know.
you got a nickel and dime here. And
Yes.
that's not gonna make it. So so the insurance will help?
Not necessarily. It depends if there's an insurable event.
Holy moly.
Right, right, and so, correct me if I'm wrong, but just like in your own home, there are some things insurance will cover, and there are some
Well,
things
they
it
won't.
won't,
Right.
and there are a lot of things you still have to pay out of pocket for. The
Yeah.
church is the same.
That goes for the Episcopal or the Catholic churches as well. They have to pay for the maintenance of their church while the bigger church owns the property. It's kind of a weird situation.
It's kind of a double whammy. They don't have any say over what happens to it, but they have to take care of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it was
Provide for insurance.
it was pointed out to me years ago, of course, that the oldest, being St. Bridget's, is also wood, and the other churches in the three towns are not. They're masonry construction, though originally Whitman was wood, but then they rebuilt it as a masonry church. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, power of personality. I love the fact that when the first congregational churches came to town, particularly first congregational, the ministry was a lifetime appointment. You got the job and you died in the job. They did not rotate very much. And then we have the contrast of the Methodists who, no matter how successful you were, you've been there long enough, you're going to move on. So what happens? And we've probably all seen situations where a good minister can build a church and grow a church and make it exciting, and a bad minister, maybe not so much. So how does one deal with that? I mean, is there a way? I mean, is there someone who oversees that? You mentioned advisors. Is
Yes.
that when you call in, if you answer to or are part of a larger body, that someone says, hey, well, do this?
yeah. Well, and that would be a good place to bring in the area minister to say, hey, I'm not really working well with this congregation.
Yeah.
What can I do? I think the preacher, the pastor, also has to be very self-aware. If you're not connecting with the congregation, if you feel like your mission is really not in line with where they want to go, then maybe it's just time for you to go, whether that's, 2 weeks after you got there or 10 years. It doesn't matter.
So if you're preaching Swedenborg, and
Exactly.
maybe you should go.
Right.
They kind of made that decision for them, though.
Yes.
But also what we're seeing, and it's scary because of the power of personality aspect of it, I have seen churches without permanent ministers.
Yes.
Is that the beginning of the end, typically?
Well, I mean, I hate to use those words and say that out loud, but there's a lot
you
of
can say it
truth
here.
to that. Yeah, it is difficult. Part of the difficulty is that this job doesn't pay very well.
Yeah.
For a lot of the reasons we just talked about, churches don't have a lot of money, and a lot of the expenses are going into their buildings. The numbers in terms of people going to churches dwindling, so there's not as many people giving to churches. So the pastor's salary is usually pretty low. So if I need to feed my family on my salary,
Heaven forbid.
what am I supposed
Right.
to do? So a lot of pastors will pastor two different churches part-time
Okay.
to try to make ends meet. But a lot of times, as you alluded to, what we're seeing is churches just can't find pastors. They can't find full-time
Or they can't afford
pastors.
them.
Or they can't afford them. Yes.
Same with organists, by the way.
It is. I was thinking that
Church
as I
musicians.
was saying it. Yes. Yeah. Churches are, well, first of all, I don't think there's a lot of people who know how to play the organ
There you go.
much anymore. But we are having a hard time also finding musicians
Yeah.
for very similar reasons.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No one's studying church music anymore. But we'll
not so
talk about
much.
that too. But I think it's something we all need to look at when we look at the overall health of a church, not just how many people are there. Who's in the pulpit? And is it someone permanent? Is it someone temporary, or what? Larry, I see your hand.
Yes. The question is a good question, but I would also add the question, how does the congregation bring in the flock or drive them away? Because you could have a wonderful pastor,
but a very toxic congregation.
Are you passing the buck, kiddo? kidding,
It
kidding.
can happen, and vice versa. You
Yes.
can have a very healthy congregation that's drawing people in, but the pastor's toxic.
I have
So you
had,
can,
yeah.
I mean, it's not just the preacher or the priest who's going to grow the congregation. It has to be congregation.
a joint effort.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can speak to what you're saying in that I have met people who have gone to visit the church to check it out, and either sometimes be told, "Oh, you can't sit there. That's my pew." Okay. Or not be greeted. And just not be invited to a coffee hour afterwards, ignored, and so they're not made to feel welcome. So that speaks to your point.
Yep.
Yes.
How welcoming is the congregation to new people? And so yes, power of personality transcends just who's in the pulpit.
Yeah.
It is the larger religious body as a whole.
Sure.
Thank you. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought it up. This one's a kicker. How many remember the Blue Laws? Show of hands. How many don't remember the Blue Laws? A few of those too? No, wait a minute. You remember the Blue Laws. Don't lie. Okay. You're older than I am. Okay, when I was growing up, you went to church on Sunday morning. You had a family dinner afterwards. I kind of alluded to that at the beginning of the program here. And then you did family stuff all day because nothing was open. You couldn't shop. I think half the time you couldn't buy gas. You couldn't do anything on a Sunday. It was dedicated to family time. It was, church in a sense, was the only game in town. That changed. Things began to erode in Massachusetts in 1977. They tested the waters, and on Sundays, from Thanksgiving to Christmas that year, and I think a few subsequent years, stores could be open on Sundays for certain hours. And it was, in someone's mind, so successful that by 1983, Sunday openings for most retail stores year-round. Things had gone to hell, so to speak, as far as the churches were concerned. And by 2003, liquor stores could be open on Sundays, and oh my God, that was the end of that. It was a changing landscape. And I'm going to posit, because I've read it, not only did it hurt church-going numbers and populations, but it began to begin, I like that. It began a decay in the family fabric. We had families going different directions on Sundays, not spending time together, not sharing a meal together, and it had an influence on families and behavior and everything else. So, I don't know, you're kind of young for Blue Laws.
Well,
But you know about them.
no, I do remember when I was a kid, we went to my grandmother's house every Sunday for Sunday dinner, and I remember the stores were not open until probably noontime or so.
We were in a transition at that point.
Yeah, we were in that transition time. But Sundays were still very much dedicated to family time. I remember playing with my cousins and that kind of thing. I think, I was talking to my husband about this, and saying that people who were churchgoers were going to go to church anyways. The laws and the rules didn't matter. So what? The stores open at 9 a.m. instead of noon. I'm still going to church because I'm committed. I think the challenge came for people who needed the money, people who needed to support their families, people who needed to work on the weekends or work extra jobs. They were now given the opportunity, in a lot of cases, for time and a half, right?
To make money.
To make a lot more money on Sundays. So if I have to choose between going to church and making money to support my family, that's really a non-issue for a lot of people.
And I'm not sure the year, but of course at some point along the line, the Catholic Church decided it was okay to have services on Saturdays,
Yes.
which opened up some other possibilities.
Right. Well, it gave opportunity for Catholic people to kind of do both, to go to worship on Saturday and then work on Sunday. For us poor Congregationalists, it just meant we were losing out.
Yeah.
And I imagine for other denominations,
Sure.
who only had Sunday services as well.
Can I add something to that? Sorry.
Yeah.
Deb, yes.
So, Another aspect was what happened with the schools and with children's programs.
Yes.
I was the head of the Christian Education Board, and every year I would write letters to the schools thanking them for not planning things on Sunday.
Sundays.
And, you know, a lot of sports outside things did, the schools weren't, and then the schools started doing it. And then parents were left with, and kids were left with, do I play, you know, my sport? Do I, you know, go my band rehearsal or whatever? Or do we go to church? And, you know, you can't stop kids from taking part, you know what I mean? And so we lost a lot of families at that time too.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true. And I'll tell you, as a mother myself, that is a very difficult conversation to have with your children, you know, to try to make that choice.
And that actually transitions, Danny.
Yeah, we had the same problem too with when you could go to church on Saturday afternoon at the Catholic Church, which isn't a problem. But on Sunday mornings, a lot of our parents started doing the same thing with the children.
Yeah.
Now they have sports to go to, so once in a while, during the winter mainly, they'd come to church, but then when the weather got good, they'd be playing basketball, baseball outside. It was the same type of issue.
Yes.
The family breakdown, and our Sunday school at one time, we're up to 150, now we're down to about 5.
Now, and I'm not sure if it's unique to Channing or not, but I'm familiar with a couple of Unitarian Universalist churches that stop services in the summer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like throw up our hands and just go do your stuff, we'll see you in the fall.
Well, part of that was too, a lot of people had summer places, and they would go to
Away.
the beach areas or to the mountains. But churches would open up in that area. It's like the Brant Rock Union Chapel, they opened in the summertime.
So it wasn't that they weren't going to church, they were going someplace else?
Yes, they could go
At
someplace.
least they had an option. Okay, interesting.
When you talk about, too, with the ministry and whatnot, we've had ministers that were very vibrant, brought in lots of people. We didn't have to advertise because the people themselves did it. And it worked great. We had one in particular that had the nerve to go and die on us the next month.
That's not fair.
No, it's not fair. It worked out great. We had him 1 day a week, and sometimes two. He took care of other services. But he had a full-time job in the Everything worked great that way.
Right.
And we've had ministers that say, well, maybe this congregation isn't one that's meant to grow. I
Interesting.
said, well, if that's the case, maybe we can't keep you.
Yeah,
If you're looking at it that way.
yeah. Power personality again there too.
And then when you talk about the money, we had a clay tile roof that was put on the building in the very beginning, when it was built, dedicated in 1889. When we looked into having it replaced, it would cost $3.5 million.
Yeah.
Because they all came from northern Wales by ship.
Okay, and who has that money?
Yeah, so we were fortunate we had a good contributor that paid for the roof for, I think it was $37,000 rather than $3.5 million.
That's still a lot of money.
A standard roof.
Yeah, okay. That begins to talk about our, I think, not quite final slide here, but again, what has changed, what makes it difficult. This is actually your list in case you don't recognize it, and so actually I'm going to let you take the lead here and talk about these different topics. The others I kind of identified from the outside, but from where you sit, these are some things that you thought should be discussed and talked about.
Yeah, so these are some of the topics that come up among clergy when we talk about what is happening to the church. Why are the numbers shrinking? Why is this so hard for us? The first one on the list, secularization. This is something that I think a term that was coined by sociologists and philosophers, people like Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emil Durkheim. And the idea is that the more educated and the more financially prosperous a society is, the less likely they are to go to church.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so around here, where we have some of the best colleges and universities in the world, people are very highly educated. So the northeast region of the country is one of the hardest in which to be a pastor, because people just don't go to church. Yeah, you hear me. The internet. You know, years ago, people went to church to feel connected to one another, or to find a community in which they could meet people with common interests and make friendships. Now, you don't have to look beyond your computer screen to find that.
Right.
There's all sorts of Facebook groups, and God only knows what else is out there. I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but people find connections that way. So they're less likely to feel like they need to go to church
But
to find
you guys, of
connections.
course, took advantage of the internet during COVID.
We did, like a lot
And
of
you're
churches.
still doing it. It's good.
Yes. And I have said, so like a lot of churches, we jumped on Facebook at the start of the pandemic so that we could provide services for our congregation. When we came back into the church building, we continued to provide those services on Facebook. And it has come in handy for folks who are either sick or in long-term facilities maybe, who can't get out. It's come in handy for folks who are on vacation. They're still able to jump on and check in. Or somebody who just isn't feeling well and doesn't want to expose the community to whatever it is they have. The disadvantage, though, is that there are people who say, I can fold my laundry, eat a bagel, stay in my pajamas, and watch worship? I'd much rather do that. So what happens in the church building is we have fewer and fewer people, and our church really is a community of people. And so while we consider the folks on Facebook a part of our community, it's really no substitute for being there in person. So that's been a bit of a double-edged sword.
Sure.
I'm not sure I need to say too much about politics.
Politics and religion, that's never discussed in polite society, so
Right.
yeah.
Politics, as you well know, has divided this country and people everywhere. And so we see that in the church as well. The denomination in which I'm ordained is a liberal denomination, but I have people in my congregation who lean conservative. And so, there's possibility for division if we start getting into political issues. I never will talk politics from the pulpit, nor should any pastor, in my opinion, because it can be very divisive. Changes in the family structure, if you've got mom and dad divorced and the kids are spending Monday through Friday with mom, she's not bringing them to church. And if they're with dad on the weekends, he's only got 2 days with them, so he's not bringing them to church. So there's a lot of, reasons why families that are split up would not attend a church. It's just another thing to kind of put on their list of things to do when they're already trying to balance a split life. And then busyness, we touched on that. Deb, your comment, I think, is related to that. Kids today, families today are so busy. And I wrote about this in my doctoral work, which was focused on youth ministry, about how kids today are pushed so hard to be involved in sports and clubs and to get good grades so that they have things to put on their college applications. And, what would the college admissions office say if they got an application from a student that didn't participate in all of these activities, yet wrote a heartfelt essay about who she was and how the church influenced her life? Would that be passable?
Don't know. Would it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't work in college admissions. But I think it's hard for particularly young people because they're told to stay busy. They're told to, get your volunteer work in and get your clubs and your sports and get good grades. So church just continues to fall to the bottom. And the parents who are trying to support those kids also, like Deb mentioned, they're in a tough spot too. They want to support their children as best they can. And in many ways, they kind of have to go with what society is telling them. And society isn't telling them to go to church.
Can a lot of this be summed up as too many distractions?
Way too many distractions.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay. I think
absolutely.
that's important.
Yeah.
And so, what do we do about it? She takes a deep sigh in case you didn't catch that. What does one do?
Yeah.
I mean, I in my fantasy mind, I say, let's bring back the blue laws or some equivalent thereof.
Right.
Let's say, how about as a society we take one day a week and just say, I'm not going to shop today. I'm not going to. I'm going to spend time with family. Maybe I'll go to church. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. If we think it's damaging in our own lives, how about taking steps to deal with it?
Yeah.
But you, as part of your doctoral work, also looked at younger people and involving them. Can you just enlighten that in terms of how that plays into this, perhaps?
Yeah, so let me just tell you that ironically, prior to the pandemic, my husband Ken and I were the youth group leaders, and we had a bustling group of youth. I mean, they were just awesome. We had anywhere from 8 to 15 at one given time. They were involved, they were active, they loved coming, we loved spending time with them. Then the pandemic happened. 3 years later, a lot of them went off to college, and the rest of them just said, I guess I don't really need church. I haven't been here in 3 years.
And I'm still here.
So I spent the most of the pandemic writing my dissertation, which was called the ZOE program. It was a new and different approach to youth ministry, only to come back to the church with no youth.
Pretty frustrating.
Very frustrating. So a lot of what I learned in writing that dissertation does translate to the adults in the church. So it wasn't, a complete and total loss. Back in, let me shift gears a little bit. Back in 2015, the United Church of Christ in Abington went through a discernment program, because we recognized that a lot of churches were dying, and we knew we needed to do something about it if we were going to survive. And so we decided to really just put a focus on our mission and our ministry, and not worry so much about how many people were sitting in our pews, which is a hard thing to do when you're used to, years and years of seeing 200 people out in the pews. It's hard to adjust to suddenly, here we have 40. But we decided that, we needed to be a unified group. We needed to focus on our mission. We needed to really get to know our community. And we needed to not only step outside of the box, but break the box down and put it in the recycle bin, because we weren't getting back in it. We needed to do something different. So our church, we invented a couple of new worship services. We, as I just mentioned, started really focusing on our community here in Abington, trying to be involved in all of the different things that go on here, and trying to really minister to the people in our very neighborhood instead of constantly turning inward and focusing on our own woes. I don't know that that's the solution forever. But it has certainly worked for UCC Abington.
That's great.
Yeah.
I had the privilege and honor of being associated with Abington Celebrates for a few years, particularly at their inception. And pretty much every event that Abington Celebrates did, UCC Abington was there.
Yes, and we still are very grateful to you for bringing us in on that, and helping us to really claim our spot as Abington's first church. It's our claim to fame around here.
Like 100 years before anyone else. So
Yeah.
there you go. You earned it.
And people have gotten to know us in the community. I know I get comments almost everywhere I go about what a great congregation you are and how much great work you do. And we're not huge, we're I would say we have maybe 40 to 50 people who come on a Sunday morning, maybe 60 or so regular people in the church, but we take what we've got and we do a lot of really good ministry.
Excellent. It brings back another point that I've noticed over the years, and how can I word it? False steps, false starts, maybe false is a bad word for it. I remember at times seeing a congregation of young parents, an altar full of young children, Easter, Christmas, whatever. And then they kind of went away, and it occurred to me that what a church needs to survive, we think it needs certainly youth, and it does. But a lot of young families with young children have perhaps no time and perhaps limited funds.
Yes.
So what it takes, I think, to see a church grow and go and continue are people committed to doing the work, jumping in and participating and helping out and volunteering, and also putting forth the funding to
Yes.
keep it going. Does one target audiences like that? And it makes it sound very mercenary to do that approach, but is it part of the equation? I mean, does one look at a population and say, how do we reach those people?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for us, we feel like we reach people naturally just because we preach a message of love and care and acceptance and
Something they need to hear.
something they need to hear. You know,
Absolutely.
again, going back to the personality of the preacher, I mean, I could pound on the pulpit every Sunday, but that isn't going to bring people in.
No.
You know, but talking about how we can better love each other, how we can make our community stronger, how we can, you know, for us as Christians, do all the things Jesus asked us to do, makes us a stronger community, and then in doing ministry out in the wider community, people see that and they appreciate that. As far as money goes, we try to focus on generosity and gratitude, you know, which of course are related to money, and yes, we need money. I mean, that, you know, that's what pays the bills and you
Keeps
know,
the
all
building going. Yeah.
Right. When we need a new roof and all of that
Oh, yeah.
kind of stuff. So it is important. But you know, from a faith perspective, if we put more focus on gratitude and generosity, that is going to encourage people to be more grateful and more generous. So it's not so much about, well, I know you can afford more. It's about, you know, do you believe in this mission? We really need your generosity, and we're grateful for everything you do and everything you give.
That sounds like a healthy attitude. I remember there was a church that's no longer in town that closed, and the minister was dealing with giving up, selling the building, and you could probably figure out which one I'm talking about. But anyway, he said in front of a group that was interested in taking over the building that he wanted to move their religion, their ministry, their efforts to Norwell or Hanover or Hingham, where he'd find a wealthier congregation. and I was astounded. I said, you actually said that out loud. I mean, I guess it can be part of an equation, but to hear a minister, and that church, by the way, even in that other location is closed. So, I mean, karma.
Wow, shocking.
Yeah, really,
Yeah.
exactly. But there was a reality to it,
Yes.
which that stuck with me. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, a little truth to power here. Yeah, I mean, you need money to do it, and you're not making it where you are. And if you hope to survive, it's one of the ways
Yes.
to do that.
Yeah,
So,
you do need money to survive, and we have a strong board of trustees who are well aware of that and do the best they can to work with the numbers and to educate people and to teach people about what it is we need to survive
where the money goes.
and where the money goes,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
again, if that conversation isn't coming out of a place of gratitude and generosity, then it's going to go nowhere.
If it's just mercenary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and self-serving at that
Right.
point.
Exactly.
I see a couple of hands up. You, ma'am, you're close, but I have some in the back too. We'll start with you. No, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking with the youth, depending on what denomination, Catholic, whatever, and all the other people, that they kind of contribute with the children during that, that summertime break, or not summertime, but maybe even the middle break in the winter, that they take, I know some of the Catholic churches, they actually go places, and we have anybody in need, and to show these children, like you said, it's love, and it's even if in your backyard and a small group of people that need stuff, or going on to a soup kitchen, all that stuff.
Yes.
And these children, because everybody has so much stuff, you have no idea what the poor souls on the street.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we tell
And they're
stories.
not that far away. They're only in Brockton or
Exactly.
backyard.
And that's, UCC Abington has really tried to focus on our immediate community for that very reason. And, my husband and I talk often about the looks on the kids' faces. The first time we brought them over to Mainspring House to deliver homemade
That is
sandwiches that they put together themselves. I mean, there is nothing like seeing the understanding that comes when you witness it yourself. And that is important important for adults, but it's important for our children too.
Yes.
Awakening kids who have perhaps not everything, but everything they need.
Yes.
To see there's a section of the population does not.
Yes. Yep.
John, I saw.
Or the shelters, like you said, the women's shelters, I mean.
Yes.
Do you find that there's a loss of religious faith in the country? And it seems like more people are becoming egocentric. All they care about is themselves. All they care about is getting to work. They don't care about letting people out. So getting away from that, why would they care about going to church? You know what I mean? It seems like society has totally shifted away from caring about others and only caring about yourself. And that's kind of disturbing in my point of view, but I don't know how that factors in with losing numbers at the church.
Yeah. Well, I do think we see that, and I think it relates to some of the other things we talked about, the busyness, the internet, other things that are distracting us from what really matters in life. So, in the church, I mean, it's hard to say. The folks who come to my church we don't have that problem. They're not egocentric. These are people who give of themselves all the time. And I think the best we can do, as I mentioned before, is to just continue to try to share that message so that, there's a ripple effect. And if people are seeing that, good things are happening, people are being fed, people are feeling loved because of what this group is doing, maybe I should do more of that. I think also people are, and I'm in this category, moving away from religion and moving toward faith and spirituality. People generally want to do things to feed their own souls as much as they want to help feed the souls of others. And if churches can help to provide that space for them, so that you can come into a church and not feel like religion has been preached to you so much as you have been given the opportunity to foster your own spirituality and faith, and then been encouraged to go out and help your neighbors, help the least of these. I think we just need to keep doing more of that, because you're right, it's a tough world out there.
I'm reminded of someone I know, and I've said it in the past, one of the most Christian people I know is an atheist.
Yeah.
Really, in terms of doing what is expected of a good Christian.
Yes.
And yet the person is an atheist. And I marvel at that. It's like, okay, how do you process? It doesn't matter how you process that. It's a good deeds being done.
Absolutely. I've heard similar types of statements about, Christians versus atheists, and there are Christians who, again, are so wrapped up in religion and dogma and the rules of the church, whatever they are. I don't know, our church doesn't really have rules, that they forget about what the message is. Whereas an atheist who has said, I don't need any of that religion, can spend more time focusing on, what it is they're supposed to be doing, living a good life, helping their neighbors.
Absolutely.
Now, that is in no way an advertisement to become an atheist. I think there's a lot of hope in Christianity and in other religious faith traditions, but I think there is a point to be had in there, for sure.
There is. It just amazes me at times.
It's about focusing on the mission and the ministry at hand.
I think it's a lesson. I think I saw one more question back there, Bill.
We've raised now, I would say, 3 generations of non-joiners. That's people the age of some of the people in this room. Talk to men and women who are in garden clubs, Masonic, Knights of Columbus type things. Their membership has dropped drastically.
Yes.
I almost hesitate to mention this, but I am active in a congregational church not far from here. We are well endowed. And that makes a world of difference. We have a paid youth director. We have 700 to 800 kids in our youth group. Not unusual to have upwards of in 3 age groups, 200 kids attend. You need the money. And if you haven't got it by now, you can go into Quincy, and I'm sure it's so in Brockton. You have a UCC church in Quincy, it's huge. They have one of the largest pipe organs in Massachusetts. They can survive with 20 to 30 people in the congregation because they have granite quarry industry money behind them and will have it behind them forever. So there are other factors that have to do with this. Again, non-joining. Won't put their name down on a membership list.
Well, we see that here. Really. I mean,
Yeah.
Historical Society of Old Abington. You know, trying to find people to fill positions in the various towns and to do the work.
Yeah.
It's falling to fewer and fewer of us. So it's not an uncommon topic. And again, I'll go to some of the same things we've been talking about: societal distractions, interests. I can get all that history sitting at my computer on the internet. Well, you can't, but nonetheless, it's a different audience, it's a different competition for all the same reasons we're talking about. So this topic actually covers a broader spectrum, I guess, although we've chosen to focus on religion. But your point is well taken about a church with greater financial resources has a greater opportunity to grow and do different things with more resources. That's probably a very true statement.
So that phenomenon is called social isolation, and
Wow.
it's one of the. I didn't put it on the list, but it is on the list. Yeah, in addition to being the pastor of UCC Abington, I'm also the commander and chaplain for the American Legion here in Abington, and we see the same thing. The numbers are dropping. We still have a fair number of people who are on our membership list, but
You don't see them.
we get. I don't know, what do we get, 5 people at a meeting, every month?
Yeah.
And it becomes harder and harder to provide activities and events because we just don't have the volunteers we need. And that seems to be true across the board for organizations, and you said you're seeing the same thing here.
Absolutely.
I get what you're saying about the money. Sure, having money makes it easier, but without the mission, without the ministry, without the focus on, what your organization is called to do in society, I'm not sure the money matters. You can keep the building standing and you can pay all your great staff, but if you've got nobody doing the real ministry and work,
lost the way.
yes, then you
People are
have
not
lost
leaving
the way.
endowments. That's another piece. So they're leaving money to their families now, whereas
In the
what we
past.
saw in the past, the church was a priority, and it was part of a person's will.
Right.
And what we do not see that.
I think UCC got a whole new heating system once upon a time from.
We do, and we do have that
Yeah.
endowment
Yeah.
that we, as the trustees, do not want to tap into because
If it's gone, it's gone.
we're going to live within our budget,
Right.
and
Yeah.
what we do is we take a percentage out of our portfolio that we'll consider as income. But if we were to just use it up, we'd be 10 years and we'd be out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the big thing to tie it back to is people are not leaving money to the church as they did years ago.
Yeah, that's a
A
big
different
factor.
focus on finances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Goes to the families.
Okay, we need to wrap up. This has been fascinating. Okay, one more question.
Well, I want to make a statement. Abington wanted to incorporate when the split happened, and you know that they could not because they didn't have a pastor.
Are you talking about 1711?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
They tried and they had a learned elder, but no, we needed to get Sam Brown in.
Yeah.
And Sam
Exactly.
Brown came to town.
So the focus and the importance during that time, from the time of the Pilgrims up until that point, was the government, the first government that God created was the family. The family, then the church came, before the civil government. And that was the secret.
The churches were the government.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what I'm
They
saying.
collected the taxes, they did
Yeah.
everything,
Yeah.
up until we became a country.
Yeah.
And then it changed. Separation of church and state became real. So-
Well, separation of church and state is not correct.
Well, okay.
It's not correct. No, I need to say, the Constitution says the government will not institute a religion.
Correct.
It's not to say that the church is not involved in government. That's a totally different thing.
Mhm.
But I just wanted to mention, May 4th is National Day of Prayer. And if you haven't been down to the Forefathers Monument in Plymouth, as many times as I had been there as a kid, never knew it was hidden up on the hill. It's awesome. And there's going to be a large group there praying
Nice.
for our country, and don't we need it now? And people should go back to church. And let's flip this thing around. Let's
Okay.
get back to faith and principles and values.
Choose your church and go.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, on that note, I'm sorry, Cinda, one last.
Okay, I'm going to just say one thing, just about clubs and things like that. My granddaughter goes to a high school in Taunton. No religion is taught there.
Yeah?
And now, when it's time to say the Pledge of Allegiance, you don't have to. So she said that only 4 people in her class got up to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I think even when I was in school, it was during the Vietnam War, and we didn't have to.
But did you?
Oh, I did, but I had a classmate who did not.
Well, this is
She sat down and didn't, and I didn't think less of her for doing it. It was her opinion and whatever, but it was, the opportunity was offered to do it, and
Yes.
most of us chose to do it. But it wasn't forced. And even back then, it wasn't forced to do it. It was an option. So in terms of how things change, yeah.
Yeah, you may be starting a different presentation now.
I think you're right. You don't want to do that. Anyway, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
Anyway, we are going to adjourn to the back room where there is a brief collation set up, some refreshments for you, and you can feel free to stay and talk among yourselves and see if there are any more questions to be answered. We will be in touch. If you're not on our email list, please make sure you're signed up or on our mailing list. We want to reach out to you. I do this exercise all the time. How many people here are members? Look around and see who is not raising their hands and make sure you say hi to them and make them feel welcome. We're not going to be the church who no one talks to. So thank you all for being here. You've been a great audience, a great turnout, and we will see you in the fall. Thank you.